The leaks surrounding Wizards of the Coast's new, open, again, heavy quotation marks, gaming license is raising quite a few eyebrows across the internet. And I did a video talking about the, general elements of it according to the Gizmodo leaked version yesterday. But since that was a generalistic video talking about everything whilst reading the article, it got a bit more hazy and long. So I figured today we are going to delve a little bit deeper down into the specifics of the original Open Gaming License and this apparent new version, and what it really means, how bad it is, and if it is legally enforceable at all, which I have my doubts around, but there is also the question as to whether or not it even needs to be, or if the Wizards of the Coast could simply muscle their way through to compliance. So let us start with the biggest and most important and immediate question: what does this mean for third-party license owners, or those making content based upon the Open Gaming License? Well, if the leaked language is correct, this means death. There is really genuinely no other way to put it but death. As the new Open Gaming License grants Wizards the, quote, non-exclusive, perpetual, irrevocable, worldwide, sub-licensable, royalty-free license to use that content for any purpose, end quote. This means that anything you create under the Open Gaming License, anything whatsoever, is Wizards' property, and they can do with it whatever they want, wherever they want, whenever they want, and they are under no obligation to pay you a penny. Better yet, they can even license away your creation to somebody else and then charge them a license fee. It's almost beautiful in its cruelty. And to add extra injury to injury, since this new Open Gaming License is claimed to be by Wizards an update to the old gaming license, which is no longer valid, it also means that any and all systems, sourcebooks, etc., that was based on the original Open Gaming License is now the property of the Wizards of the Coast. And they can do with them whatever they want. Now, Wizards' argument for why they're doing this and why they're not actually outright spawns of Satan for doing it will undoubtedly be that they're totally not going to abuse it, you see. They are not going to take your copyright away, they are not going to license out your stuff, and they're not going to sell it for themselves. They merely need those rights so as to, for example, present them in a compilation, make a web page on their site saying, hey, these are all the things that we made with the Open Gaming License and third-party creators, and theoretically, they are sorta correct. But the question then becomes, do you trust the Wizards of the Coast to not abuse these tremendous powers granted to them, especially considering that right now they are revising unilaterally a 20-plus-year-old agreement with no feedback from anybody else, and claiming that the old agreement that many people agreed with, signed, and abided by is now suddenly null and void, whilst granting themselves infinite powers in the process. Sometimes when people are telling you that they're evil, maybe you should just believe them. A radical thought, I know, but worth considering. Especially as the Wizards also grant themselves the power to, quote, can modify or terminate this agreement for any reason whatsoever, provided we give 30 days notice, end quote. So, even if for some reason you did enter into the agreement and you got an agreement saying, okay, we're not actually going to do this to you, well, they've also given themselves the power to just revoke that whenever, for any reason. And there was something that the Gizmodo article didn't pick up on that I saw on another compilation of the leak, stating that if Wizards of the Coast decide to revoke your license, then you have a period of time to not only seize all usage of that license, but to also destroy all inventory that you might have built up. In other words, if you create a thing, and you put all of your money into making that thing, into getting the plastic models, into getting the books, into getting the rule sets, etc., and Wizards of the Coast says, nah, we don't want to do that anymore, all of that money? Poof. Again, somebody tells you they're evil. Listen. This in turn then of course leads us to the next big question, whether or not any of this can actually be enforced onto third-party rights holders. Now, if any of them are silly enough to actually sign the new agreement, then probably yes. The terms in the agreement are draconian, and they might be draconian to the point of being difficult to enforce, but as long as there is an agreement, there is at the very least the possibility, even the likely possibility, that the terms therein can be enforced upon a third-party rights holder. However, anyone who used the original Open Gaming license also agreed to point 4 of it, which says, quote, "Grant and consideration. In consideration for agreeing to use this license, the contributors grant you a perpetual worldwide royalty-free non-exclusive license with the exact terms of this license to use the open game content." End quote. The key term there being perpetual. So these rights are granted forever. This seems then like a pretty open and shut case, and indeed it may be, but Wizards of the Coast argument will rest upon point 9 of the original Open Gaming license, saying, quote, "Updating the license. Wizards or its designated agents may publish updated versions of this license. You may use any authorized version of this license to copy, modify, and distribute any open game content originally distributed under any version of this license." What Wizards will argue here is that the original license is no longer authorized, and indeed that is what they say in the new Open Gaming license, that all previous ones are no longer authorized, and therefore they no longer have any actual power or authority, and you must abide by the new license if you wish to continue releasing third-party goods. Furthermore, Wizards are allowed to make this change to you now without consultation or anything, because it is an update to the license. Now, of course, I am no legal professional, so take what I'm about to say with a pinch of salt, but this sounds very dubious to me, because there is no mention in the original Open Gaming license that Wizards of the Coast have the power to make any previous version an unauthorized version. In fact, it specifically says that you may use any authorized version of this license to copy, modify, and distribute any open game content originally distributed under any version of this license. If anything, it sounds like you have the option, if you choose, to modify your content based upon any version of the license, and adding in a clause now, 22 years later, saying that all previous licenses are no longer valid because you said so, I'm not at all sure that's going to fly. In particular, because again, under point 4, the third parties, the content creators, etc., were granted a perpetual license. There is no mention anywhere of Wizards of the Coast's ability to take away that license, to nullify it, or to deauthorize it. The only mention of termination comes in point 13, saying, quote, "This license will terminate automatically if you fail to comply with all terms herein and fail to cure such breaches within 30 days of becoming aware of the breach. All sub-licenses shall survive the termination of this license." End quote. So unless Wizards of the Coast can demonstrate that somebody who has already made a product based on this license is in violation of the license, I have a very hard time seeing how they can retroactively change the terms of agreement to that level. as they are quite literally reaching into an agreement already signed, already agreed upon, and making changes that completely null and void all of that, whilst granting themselves all the rights. At the very least, there is likely to be a legal challenge to that, in my opinion. But there's another key question, of course. Does Wizards of the Coast even need to have the law on their side? Well, not really. It's one of the problems with our current day legal system, but what appeared to be the idea here, according to the original leaked document that Gizmodo had access to, the new Open Gaming License was supposed to be released on the 4th of January, and everyone who received it would have to agree upon it by the 13th of January. So they would send this out to everyone, small and large creators, and say, "Agree, now, you've got a week, shut up and do it or we'll sue you." And then take a step back, cross their fingers, and hope and pray that the recipients of the contract would not have the wherewithal or the ice in the stomach to go, "Hold on, I don't think you have the rights that you claim you do here. I don't actually believe you can force this on me, and I'm going to go contact a lawyer to try and figure that out and potentially start litigation." Because here's the thing too, 7 days, first and foremost, is not a lot of time in legal circles, specifically not to read through a 9,000-word document undoubtedly filled with countless examples of legalese and double talk. Furthermore, in many cases, this is going to be a huge part of the recipient's business model. It might very well be the very foundation upon which it is built, and you've got a week to respond, or potentially lose all of it out of hand without any further notice or chance to salvage anything. It's a shock and awe tactic, and in many cases, it works. And of course, if in a moment of panic you then signed the new agreement, well, the new agreement voids all of your rights in accordance with the old agreement. It's a scummy tactic, as all hell, but it is probably legal. You might argue that it is an example of malice, because normally speaking, you don't send out legal demands with a 7-day notice, but malice is one of those very difficult to define things in a legal system like this, so maybe, possibly, kinda, perhaps. And of course, we also need to remember that to even have the thought to object to the new agreement, you must be able to understand the agreements that you have entered into. You must be able to go through the new 9,000-word version and compare it to the old one. You then need to have, preferably, the legal expertise to know if this can be done to you. If you don't, then you need to hire a lawyer. Then that lawyer needs to know, you've got to find that lawyer in the first place. Then they've got to go over it, and all the while the time is, of course, ticking along. To the point that many smaller creators would probably just surrender anyway because they don't really see an alternative. And even if they were to fight it, okay, you are now, as an independent creator, going to go up against Hasbro, one of the largest entertainment industries on Earth, as Wizards of the Coast is of course owned by them. They can hire as many lawyers as they damn well want to bury you in legal paperwork for however long they want. And you are going to have to fight that cause step by step over the course of God only knows how many years, and it's going to cost you God only knows how many hundreds of thousands of dollars, not to mention the mental and physical strain on you, on your business, your attention span, etc., of keeping on top of this and being kept on that you don't know what's going to happen level for, again, years and years, even as your bank account continues to deplete. This is a well-known and oft-used tactic by larger companies, and it is a large part of the reason why companies will put in place blatantly unenforceable and straight out illegal terms of service, because they assume, and largely correctly, that no individual is going to have the will, the resources, or the time to challenge these things in a court of law, as again, the process is long, expensive, obtuse, and draining in the extreme. Not to mention that there is absolutely no such thing as an absolute sure case in the legal system, as far too often it is a matter of interpretation that is the key defining factor. For example, Wizards of the Coast would again say that we interpret the original agreement to say that you may use any authorized version of this license. And since we now say that there exists no other authorized version of the license than the one we recently pulled out of our arse, therefore it is the only license. So, in other words, even if the Wizards of the Coast know that they don't have any legal right to do this, that does not mean they can't try, and it certainly does not mean that they can't get away with it. Though there should be consequences regardless of what happens here, because Wizards of the Coast have now demonstrated that they are willing to renege on a 20-plus-year-old agreement to empower themselves and to mercilessly crush those they once professed to collaborate and work together with. Again, you would be very, very, very silly indeed to ever trust Wizards of the Coast ever again with any agreement. Which is also why the Open Gaming License is the death not only of third-party producers, but of content creators and anyone engaged in any sort of content creation for Dungeons and Dragons. Because whilst the terms right now aren't that bad, in that you don't pay any royalties unless you earn $750,000, etc., and you are still free to make free, quote-unquote, content, and yet you are still allowed to have a Patreon, for example, that sounds pretty good. But again, Wizards of the Coast just demonstrated their willingness to change the terms of that agreement unilaterally with virtually no warning. For the simple reason that they want more money and more power. So how long do you think it is until they start looking at the content creators rather than their direct competition like Paizo, for example, and thinking to themselves, you know what? We should get all that publicity. We should get all of that Patreon money. We should get all of that. Because that, of course, is what Games Workshop did when they looked at the fan animation community and decided, you know what? We can do that, and we are going to threaten anyone who disagrees with us, and we are going to force the members of that community to come work for us and do whatever we want them to do. And then we are going to charge the community to gain access to what they once had free access to. For the third time, when somebody tells you that they are evil, listen, because they are likely to do something evil again. In fact, they are guaranteed to do so. It is only a question of how long you will be allowed to live at their mercy before they crush you with the tools you have granted them. So yes, to wrap it all up, I do think this new Open Gaming License is just about as bad as everyone is saying it is. In fact, it might be even worse than people have been letting on with the destruction of inventory clause, for example. And I do believe there is absolutely no question that if they get away with this, they will do it again, and probably even worse. There is no reason to assume they wouldn't. Whether or not it is legally enforceable, that is a big, big if, but again, the only people who could possibly challenge this would have to be the big competitors, like, for example, again, Paizo, as no regular individual is going to be able to take Hasbro to court and get out of there before they die of old age. And of course, Wizards of the Coast are perfectly aware of that, and that is why they are doing this. That is why they are launching the shock and awe sudden drop of all of these ridiculous requirements. That is why they wrote a 9,000-word document, and that is why they are going so very, very, very far. So, until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and best of luck to you D&D lads, because clearly you're going to need it. On the bright side, 40k is going through the same shit, except perhaps even worse, because we never had an open gaming license, so take some solace in that. Have a good day.